In this video, I'm going to give a very fast and oversimplified overview of the Greek language. So here we go. We come to a Greek sentence. First thing you have to do is be able to pronounce it, know the letters. So after you've done that, you should be able to read Legon avtis syncharitemi oti evron to provaton mu. Next, we need to figure out what those words mean. So in Greek, there are two categories of words. There's nouns and verbs. Verbs are action words like run, jump, play. Nouns are those words that do the action. So John ran, John jumped. John would be the noun, or the noun receives the action from the verb. John threw the ball. The ball would be the one that is receiving that action. It's receiving the throwing. So first thing we come to a sentence, we need to find the main verbs. So using Bible software, you can click around and find out which ones are the verbs, and it'll tell you something like this. Aorist, middle passive, imperative, second person plural. And what do those mean? So the first thing, second plural and first singular, these have to do with the subject who is doing the action. So first person singular would be I, first person plural would be we, second person singular is you, second person plural is you all, and third person would be he, she, it, or they. And then there are these three things. So aorist, active, indicative. What are these three things? They are tense, voice, and mood. So we have aorist, active, indicative. So the first one here, tense, has to do with when the action is happening. So present, it's happening now in the present. Future, it's happening in the future. Imperfect and aorist are both past, but there's a difference between them. So you can see my brief definition here. You would put was verbing. So John explained the love of God. John was explaining the love of God would be imperfect. Aorist, you would translate it as John explained the love of God. But what's the difference between those? So the difference is between verbal aspect. So aorist has perfective aspect. The imperfect tense has imperfective aspect. So perfective aspect looks at the action as a whole. So think of this parade as an action, the explaining that John is doing. Aorist looks at it as a whole from a helicopter, sees the whole action, gives a summary of it. Where imperfect looks at the parade as it's going on, and John was explaining. The action is going on before his eyes. Another way to think of it is this circle of action. Imperfective aspect is inside the action, watching it go on. Perfective aspect is outside the circle of action and just looking at it from a distance. Perfect is different from aorist imperfect. It is a past action, but we add this has before. So John has explained the love of God. And that's different from this John explained, just giving a summary of the past. When you say John has explained, it's a past action, but it's assuming that there's something happening or something going to happen with that now. Since John has explained it, maybe you have to know it for a test. Maybe you have to, I don't know, maybe John's going to do something else. Since John has explained it, he's going to move on. So there's a present implication for that past action. Pluperfect is just like perfect, except for it's moved one step in the past. So it's a super past action that had past results, but nothing in the present. The next thing we have is voice. So active voice is when the subject does the action of the verb. John explains the love of God. Passive voice is when the action of the verb is done to the subject. John is being explained the love of God. So you add that to be verb in passive to make the action go back onto the subject. So John is no longer explaining. He's no longer doing the action, but the action is being done to him. John is being explained. He's the one who is receiving the explaining. And middle is a super flexible voice. Sometimes it sounds active, sometimes it sounds passive, and sometimes it sounds in the middle. So for example, I dress myself. I'm doing the action of dressing, but that action is also being done on me. The dressing is happening to me. The last thing here is mood, and this has to do with the certainty of the verb. So the most certain is just stating a fact. John explained the love of God. Just stating a fact. He did it. Imperative, the action hasn't happened, but we're commanding it to happen. Explain the love of God. Subjunctive is more doubtful. John might explain the love of God. And optative is the most doubtful. John may explain the love of God. They're actions that haven't happened and they might happen, they're more doubtful. In biblical Greek, the distinctions between optative and subjunctive are not as large as they were in earlier forms of Greek. So going back to our sentence, we see that synkarite, Erised, so summary. Here it's probably more middle and actually acting more active. It's flexible middle. And then it's imperative, so it's giving a command. So here we go. Rejoice with. Commanding, rejoice with. Everon, Erised, so summary in the past. Active, the subject's doing the verb. And indicative, stating a fact. So I found. After you know the verbs, find the nouns around them. So here are the nouns. You see things like dative, accusative, genitive. What do these mean? These are the different cases of nouns. So the different cases determine its function in the sentence. If it's in the nominative case, it's the subject, the thing that does the action. If it's an accusative, it's the direct object, the thing that receives the action. So John explained the love. John would be the subject. The love is the thing that is being explained. So that is the direct object. It's receiving the action, the explaining. Genitive, you take the definition of the noun and just put of before it. Dative, you take the noun and put twib before it. Twib being to, with, in, or by. Nouns also have grammatical gender. This doesn't affect the meaning, but it does affect the cases. So here, me, it's dative, so think twib, to, with, in, or by, and from the word that means I. So we add twib, so you hear with, since we had rejoice with, so with, then I, rejoice with I, that's not grammatically right, so we put we, or me, which is the object form of I. Over here, accusative, so the sheep is what is receiving the action from the verb. The action is being done onto the sheep. The sheep is found. I found the sheep. And then mu is genitive of I, and you just add of before. So the sheep of I, that doesn't, remember we need the object form of me. There are no nominative. Nominative would be the subject. Here the verbs tell us what the subject is. Remember, because this was second person plural, this was first person singular, so it doesn't need to explain the nominative anymore. After that, we need to find the infinitives and participles. They both have noun and verb parts. So when a participle, it has a article before it, it is usually being used as a noun. It's being used substantively. So you would just put, here's the definition of the verb, you'd put the verbing one. So John is the explaining one. He's the one explaining the love of God. But when it doesn't have that article, a lot of times it's adverbial, and you just put the verb with plus ing. So explaining. Infinitive is you just put to before the verb. So coming back to our sentence, we don't have any infinitives, but we do have legon, which is from I say, so we add ing. Saying. Okay, last thing, we find the nouns that are attached to the participles or infinitives. Here we have a dative, so twib, to, he, she, or it. It's plural, so we put them. So saying to them, and after that, fill in the gaps. Saying to them, rejoice with me since I found the sheep of me.